All right, so I think we are live. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is Our Path Forward with CAIR Washington. I think this is our 15th episode, which is pretty cool. Our Path Forward is a weekly Facebook live show by CAIR Washington that gives viewers a behind the scenes look at the work that we do at CAIR Washington. And it also invites them to join with us in reimagining what our path forward looks like in this post-Trump, soon to be, inshallah, post-COVID era. So today we are talking about Muslim youth leading the way, and we are joined by our CAIR Washington Youth Advocacy Committee members, Sarrah Khan and Mariam Harris, and our Youth and Policy Coordinator, Najma Osman. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. I'm really excited for this conversation. I actually just wanted to start it off. I mentioned our Youth Advocacy Committee, what we call the YAC here internally. And I'm guessing that probably some people watching this haven't heard of that yet, or maybe don't know about the YAC. So Najma, who kind of is the liaison between the YAC and CAIR Washington, could you just start off by introducing what is the Youth Advisory Committee? I'm so sorry, Youth Advisory Committee. Can you talk about what is the YAC and what does it do?
Yeah, so thanks, Jess. The Youth Advisory Committee is our youth board at CAIR Washington. Sarrah and Mariam are actually both members of the YAC, and they're part of the first cohort of the YAC, who are a group of 7 phenomenal young women. We actually just finished recruiting for the second cohort and interviewing all of these amazing young people. And so that was a really inspiring experience. And so the YAC members, they are board members. They serve a 1-year term. They attend regularly scheduled board meetings. They participate in planning, outreach, and recruitment efforts for youth-related programming. So they play a key role in strategy and planning for CAIR Washington's long-term organizational goals. And they just serve as an ambassador and an active advocate for CAIR Washington.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that description, Najma. What was I calling it? The Youth Advisory Committee?
Advocacy.
Advocacy.
Which is my title. So I think it's just the advocacy in my title and the advisory.
I think that's where my brain goes. Yeah, advisory. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I want to pull in Mariam and Sarrah. I want to kick it over to you guys. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves and why you got involved in the YAC?
Sure. I'll go first, I guess. So yeah, like I said, my name is Mariam. I'm currently a 3rd-year student at the University of Washington, Seattle, intending to study public health. And I got involved in the YAC because I've been involved in kind of Muslim youth organizations or groups before, and I thought that joining CAIR Washington's, YAC is kind of a different pathway and kind of a way to cater to youth, but in a different form, through, more of a organizational political advocacy type way, instead of just having I used to be a youth group leader, and I'm currently in an MSA, Muslim Student Association leadership position. So this position is kind of a really different way of getting about at the same problem of or method of youth involvement.
Awesome. Thank you, Mariam.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Sarrah. I'm 17. I'm a rising senior at Redmond High School. So around doing my college app stuff right now. But I got involved in this youth advisory committee last year. When the protests were going on, especially the Black Lives Matter protests, CAIR had organized these youth group discussions for Muslim youth to kind of talk through what was happening and see how does how can we help, and what is our role in understanding this systemic inequality. And from this, the idea of like building this YAC was kind of thrown around, and I was really interested in joining it because I've been passionate, especially in the past couple of years, of getting youth, especially now Muslim youth, involved in the community, because if there's a lot of things that I think that this world needs to improve in, and we need, like us as youth, we're going to be living in the future, so we should be helping build that future. And when I saw this opportunity come around, I thought it was a great way for me to embrace and help other people embrace their Muslim identity, their Muslim American identity, and build a place for us in this country too.
Very cool. Thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourselves and why you got involved in the YAC. I want to definitely come back to talking more about the YAC, about the work that you all have been doing, because you've done some really, really cool stuff.
Mhm.
But right now I want to kind of shift gears a bit and talk more about something, Sarrah, you started talking about, which is the importance of youth involvement and specifically Muslim youth involvement. So I want to talk a bit about identity and lived experiences and how those really inform your activism. You're all young Muslim women of color, and this is a question for all three of you. Can you talk about why it is so important for you to, or for youth to be involved in politics, and why it is especially important for Muslim youth and youth of color to be involved? And whoever wants to start.
I guess I can start. Well, I think Sarrah definitely touched on this, but the perspective of today's youth is vital. The experience and the viewpoint of Muslim youth and youth of color especially brings immeasurable value and insight to decision making. Yeah. Gen Z is like the biggest and most diverse generation, yet with a powerful understanding of technology and a unique view of the world and social issues. We have a clear sense of like what's important to us and like to fight for what we believe in so that we live in a more equitable and just society. So Muslim youth and youth of color have always been involved in politics one way or another. But when young people are disenfranchised, especially youth of color, and a significant portion of our society has no power in decision-making processes and has little to no voice in decisions that affect our lives. So the issue isn't like whether or not youth are getting involved in politics, but rather like how can we ensure that we are elevating the platforms and giving space to youth to ensure that our voices are being heard and are also being respected.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
No, I was just agreeing, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, Najma, like that's so important. And I agree with that 100%. Like elevating voices, and a lot of like, we don't have a voice, or like a lot of us don't have like the power to vote yet. So it is like more difficult for us to get our voices heard, but it's also why it's so important, like you said, to have us be involved in the community in other ways, because, and show people that we do care about what's happening and we do want to make a difference. And Jessica, you were asking about like why it's so important for Muslims and youth people of color to get involved in this, because for a long time, I would say, because we are all minorities, it's more difficult for our voices and our concerns to be heard and addressed. So by having more youth involved, like there's so much power in numbers. If there's more of us involved and just showing up, it shows people that, wait a minute, we're here too. And what we say should make a difference. And people need to take that into consideration when they're, making policies or designing different things. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah,
for sure. I also wanted to kind of say that, politics, obviously, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can't just be like, oh, this so-and-so community or so-and-so demographic needs to be involved in politics, and we're going to put them into politics. You can't just, like, if a certain demographic doesn't have any institutional support in areas other than politics, you're not going to be able to just put them into the political sphere and expect them to do well. Politics, obviously it's related to so many other things. Like economics isn't just politics. Economics is also social. It's community based, and just a lot of there's so many things that are just revolving around politics that, you know, Muslim youth and youth of color, it's good to involve them in even non-political things, because even all that experience and all that, you know, that goodness that you can get from those other areas will definitely help in politics, and it'll really, you know, push the boundaries of, you know, what can be known or like what that demographic can do, and that'll help politics in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you all for your thoughts. Yeah, it's like even the conversation about like who has the time or the access to or the opportunity to like get involved in politics. It's like sometimes, you know, you're trying to survive or so I think that is a really important conversation too. I wanted to talk a bit about the generational differences without trying, you know, we're talking in generalizations here. We're not trying to like say all millennials are like this or whatever, but there are like marked differences, right? And we can see cultural shifts happening and shifts happening with generations. So I'm an older millennial, so I will not be offended if you say anything about my generation. But I wanted to talk a bit about, you know, these generational differences and what unique perspectives and talents that younger people bring to things that maybe are different from what older folks, and I'm including myself in that, might bring. So my question to all three of you, it's a two-part question. The first part is, from your perspective, what sort of generational differences do you see between older generations and Gen Z and millennials, or even between millennials and Gen Z? And what do you think that youth bring to the table that older generations may not?
Okay, I guess I can start. I think one of the biggest things that I see in the difference between like Gen Z millennials versus some of the older generations is because we all grew up with you guys grew up with the internet. We grew up when the internet was already huge and like smart technology. We grew up with smart technology. So yeah. All of this enabled us to have a much wider perspective of the world, in a true sense, a very globalized sense, perspective of the world. And like social media platforms, streaming platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those allow us to like connect with people from different places of the globe that might have different perspectives, different lives, different backgrounds, and understand different values. That it makes us a lot more open-minded and accepting, for the most part, of other people or other perspectives than, say, maybe older generations that didn't have that access or to other perspectives, or were more in a closed-off sort of like bubble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the, you know, obviously standout things about Gen Z is that we have like a very big meme culture, and you know, the okay boomer meme is like very, very relevant, very popular. And I think
the whole thing about boomers.
Yeah, boomers are like, you know, the generation. Yeah. So everyone's like, okay, boomer, like about sort of like, you know, really old, narrow-minded thing. And I think a lot of it, well, some of it has to do with mindset, but even mindset is, you know, determined by a lot of factors. Often, you know, like, especially Gen Z, because it's such a stark contrast, like Gen Z is a lot more, I'd say, bolder in just everything, you know, from like, even from millennials. Like if you try to, like, if you compare millennials will be like, oh, you know, we're more like, we stick to the status quo, but like people say that in a good way, but sometimes that isn't a good thing. And then Gen Z are like, we're completely different. We do like completely, you know, different things than millennials and, you know, other generations. And you know, there's obviously pros and cons of each, you know, and depending on like what perspective you have, but there's definitely a change of strategy or like a change of mindset about the entire world. Gen Z are kind of a little more, they're more out there, and they're more, you know, willing to talk about what they want to talk about, whereas older generations may, and this is not to generalize, of course, but the older generations may feel a sense of like hesitancy to speak their mind, or just kind of to, you know, show an opinion that may not have been you know, accessible to like show before, or that may not have been, you know, really seen as acceptable, you know, whatever that case may be. And of course, you know, there's exceptions to everything, but, you know, just generally, that's a difference that I think like we as Gen Z and young millennials have between, you know, older Gen Z and boomers. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think the perspectives of the older generation can be rooted in the way the world used to be. And whereas the youth can kind of give insight to, you know, insight that is relevant in a rapidly changing world. There's this quote by Nelson Mandela that says, you know, the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. But I think the youth of today are the leaders of today. They are the change makers. They are the ones who are, you know, fighting for a more just society, and are pushing back against societal norms to stand up for what they believe in. They are undervalued, undercredited. Our opinions and dedication to change the world we live in are also often discredited and disrespected because of like how young we are. And I think that the investment in youth is an investment for the future, because they are a voice for equity and inclusion, for the most part. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of like, if you want to, you need to just hear everyone's voices, right? And see the value in everyone's opinions, especially those who are marginalized, and especially those who are being affected by a lot of what's going on.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Najma. I always hated that phrase that we use. We always said, oh, youth are the future, you know, or youth are the leaders of tomorrow. It's like, it's almost like they're kind of these things that don't exist, you know, like they're going to be real people. So they're going to be leaders. It's like youth are leaders now, like they're here, and we ignore young people at our own peril. Like they have immense value. They have things to offer. They're doing things, like whether or not we pay attention or follow their lead or include them, you know, that's on us. So I'm glad you said that. This question I wrote from Mariam, but honestly, I'm going to ask Mariam, but I would love to hear Sarrah and Najma's thoughts too. And Mariam, you already talked a little bit about this in your answer to the last question, but I know you've talked a couple times with me about how you feel that this generation, you know, Gen Z and like younger millennials, they are bolder in their activism and they are more intersectional than previous generations, much more so, I would say. And you said that you think that this trend is a worldwide pattern that transcends race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and other kind of things that separate us. Can you talk more about that, Mariam? And yeah, I would love to hear others' thoughts as well.
Yeah, for sure. The main things that I said that, you know, why, like when people ask, why is this younger generation so bold and so intersectional, you know, like the previous generation wasn't this way. I firmly believe that it's because of passion and necessity, and both kind of inform each other. You know, younger people are dealing with so many more problems internationally, globally, you know, everywhere, instead of, you know, like obviously everyone has their own problems in their, you know, generations, but also with the use of technology, people are so connected globally, and with that connection becomes awareness of wrongs that are happening. You know, like there are still, you know, there's still a lot of violence against minoritized people because of structural inequities that haven't been changed, that haven't been fixed. You know, economic failure, recession, you know, literal genocide in parts of the world that started in earlier generations and are still happening. And like this focus on intersectionality, although like we know it's not new, there have been people and activists that have focused on intersectionality in their activism. It's because of these big events and awareness of them, you know, like the murder of George Floyd, the Palestinian crises that are happening, human rights abuses in East Turkestan, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, there's so much more that people are realizing, that they're realizing that intersectionality is a necessity. You can't solve anything without being intersectional, you know. And like I've said this before, and I know it may seem a little bit pessimistic, maybe, but like younger people are also taking the lead on issues because a lot of people feel that older generations either can't understand them, like their situation, or that they're like, oh, I don't care anymore. You know, a lot of, especially like if you look at, you know, the climate change and all of that stuff, people are like, oh, you guys can deal with that, you know. So
No,
it's,
yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of
Especially
stuff.
for like, I feel like Mariam, the climate change example was really the best one to, you know, to highlight the reason why so many young leaders, I feel like, are really stepping up to the plate is because we have elected leaders and politicians and that are supposed to speak out and create change. But they're not doing that because they're not going to be around to witness the consequences, the disastrous consequences of not just like, you know, climate change and like environmental concerns, but also like social, economic, political disruptions and inequities and all of that. It's just slowly building up and it's gonna fall apart soon. And we're gonna be the ones that are gonna have to really see the aftermath. And like you said, Mariam, that's one of the biggest reasons I think that intersectionality and like youth leadership has really gone up in its importance and in awareness also.
Mm-hmm. One example I think that like really speaks to this is like the recent boycott by Ben and Jerry's of Israel. And
Mm-hmm.
Israel is just reacting so negatively to Ben and Jerry's, which is a private company. It's not an international body. And a lot of people have been commenting on that, and they're saying, you know, like this ice cream company has done more to support Palestinians than the UN, than any nation state that has armies and money and so many other things at their disposal.
Political
So
power.
you really, exactly, you realize that places of power and people of power are not going to help you. And so that's why a lot of youth are like, we have to do this work ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts on that. I think the thing with global warming, like you guys are talking about, like it's literally, you know, I used to do like film and TV, and we'd always talk about in a good story, you have like some sort of ticking time bomb. Like there's some sort of like time pressure on the story to make a good story. And unfortunately, this isn't about a good story, but yeah, like there's a clock on this, right? And I think, yeah, that makes everything like urgent. My next question, Najma, did you have anything you wanted to add on that, or?
Oh, I think they hit the nail on everything. Every like successful social change in the US has been because of young leaders and young leaders backing and pushing for it. So yeah, youth are the truth. Like, yeah.
That's a perfect, yeah, we should make t-shirts and sell them with our logo, of course, as well on it. So that's perfect for my next question. I was wondering if you all could tell me about who is a young activist or a couple of young activists who you look up to that inspire you.
I can go first. I would say Marie Copeny, or Little Miss Flint. She's only 13 years old. She's a 13-year-old activist, philanthropist, and she, you know, kind of gained popularity through her activism, specifically advocating for like about the Flint water crisis and like fundraising for her community. And she started when she was like 8 years old, I think. And her just unwavering like persistence and all of that has just been so inspiring, because it really doesn't matter how young you are, like your voice matters. And she's like a really good example of someone who's also just like very involved in her own community and knows the power of her voice.
Sarrah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, obviously Malala Yusufzai. She's like a very, you know, she's very prominent. She's very well known, but a lot of, so I'm South Asian, and not a lot of South Asians have been featured in the realms of activism and, you know, efforts to combat, you know, world problems. And I think that although, you know, the circumstances of her activism were of course very tragic and very, you know, saddening, the fact that people know about her and that they praise her for, you know, being who she is and doing what she does is absolutely amazing. And not only that, I recently have kind of shifted my focus to including more Indigenous activists. Previously, my also like my like social media feed and just my general, you know, outlook on activism has often left out Indigenous people, which is, you know, a personal fault of mine, and also like, you know, it is institutional because Black and Indigenous people are the most vulnerable populations, you know, living in this world right now. And so, although they're not youth, there is this woman named Sarrah Fox and Sheena Nova who are Indigenous Canadians, and they are, you know, they're working to uplift, you know, Indigenous people and to protest a lot of, you know, like pipelines and other, you know, actions that are very, you know, really harmful to the Indigenous community. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize that Indigenous communities, even in, you know, so-called developed nations as Canada and the US, they're living without basic necessities. A lot of reservations in the US, like in the Midwest, they don't have running water. The nearest grocery store is miles away. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, obviously when you idealize a certain nation or a nation state, you tend to brush all of their faults under the rug. But, you know, Indigenous people have never been able to put that under the rug, so they've been dealing with it for so long. And I, you know, I, as a person and as a person of color who is not the most vulnerable population, it is also my fault that I haven't been helping out and that I haven't been researching. So, you know, I think there should definitely be more emphasis on Indigenous voices. And, you know, like with all the climate change talk, like obviously Greta Thunberg is like a huge name. Everyone loves her, you know, she's spoken, of course, but with her are also many, many Indigenous activists, many Indigenous youth activists that haven't been getting the same recognition. So, you know, I'd really push for more Indigenous acknowledgement and recognition in really all forms of social justice, whether it be related to climate change and global warming or just, you know, other areas.
Yeah, I'd like to, it was so important. I'm glad you brought up the point about Indigenous activists. And that reminded me actually of how, like, you know, youth activism, I feel like it's also grown in recent years because of like social media and especially TikToks. Like one TikToker that I like, I don't know, her videos are really fun. She's Indigenous Canadian. Her name is Michelle Chubb. Or Tube, and she's not an activist, but I find that the terminology, especially for younger people, like what is defined as activism is like slightly changing. Like social media and performative activism, that's like not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about, you know, really using your platform, if you have one, to highlight important issues or things that nobody's talking about and spreading awareness through that. So that's something that, and even sharing culture and showing people that, you know, we've been here all along, you just haven't been looking, is so valuable. And these avenues have really been opened up because of just how interconnected we are now. So that's just something that I wanted to bring up. And another youth activist, she's also like pretty well known from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. There were a few survivors that had really used the attention of the media to push for reform and took the mic for themselves and spoke up. One of them was Emma Gonzalez. So she gave like that really iconic, you know, I call BS speech. And I remember watching that, and I was like in 8th grade then. And I was like, how is she doing that? Like she's like talking in front of like, and I just found it so like awe-striking that like she had things to say and she didn't care if she like messed up something. She had so much passion that she's like, you are all going to listen to me because I might be young, but I know what I'm talking about. And I feel like that was one of the first times I kind of realized that, I can't say like, oh, I'm only 14 or back then, or I'm only 13 as an excuse to not care about what happens more than in my immediate circle of friends or in my own life. I have to look outside of that. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I know, Sarrah, when we were preparing for this episode, you kind of alluded to some of the challenges that Muslim youth who are involved in the community face. And we didn't get too much time to like dig into that, like in our preparation. I was wondering, like, could you expand on that?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so one of the challenges, so there's two parts to this, like challenges of getting, the first part is the challenge of getting Muslim youth involved in the greater community. So like showing up to events that are not just like, at our local mosque, but also like community events like town halls. And then the second part is Muslim youth that are involved and are trying to make a difference, getting their voice to be heard and recognized and valued. So those are the two parts that are two different challenges, but both are really important. So for the ones for youth that are already like actively involved in the community, because I think we've touched on this before when we were talking about why it's important for minorities to be involved, is since I would say like we are like somewhat like a minority within a minority, where most Muslims in the United States are generally people of color, but not all of them, but and then Muslims there's not that many. There's like 1% of the population in the United States is Muslim. So, and then if you think of that, like maybe half or less are youth. So having our voices even show up at the table is difficult. And which is why when we have things like, getting excused for prayer at school, or having our holidays, like our religious holidays recognized, or having time off during Ramadan for exams or things like that, that's when it's especially for Muslim youth to show up and say like, I care about this and I want people to speak on this and I want change to happen. That's so important. And I really don't know how to fix the problem of getting our voices heard, but I think the biggest thing is strength is in numbers. So one of the biggest things I think that we, like as CAIR, the Youth Advisory Committee, we're trying to do, and what the bigger Muslim community should also push for, is bringing or encouraging their kids, or if you're a teen yourself, you guys should just show up and see what there is for you to do and in which ways you can help, because there is a lot. You just have to just look out and see that even though we have been disregarded and it's difficult to have your voice heard, you just need to make the first step and there'll be a lot of options for you. So please just show up, and there's a lot you can do.
Yeah, one thing I think that you were saying, like how to get our voices heard, maybe a little controversial, especially coming from me, but I feel like we have to like push back against the older person heavy administrations of Muslim organizations and just leadership in general. Like often in a lot of masajid, like masjids will have youth groups, they'll have Sunday schools, and they'll have all these programs, but you don't see a single young person in the administration. It's always older people, and usually older males that are running the masajid, the organizations, the everything. So really, like if you want to make change at an institutional level, you have to get more youth and more underrepresented youth, like females of color. Females of color especially are like, you need that if you want to make good change.
And I think, Mariam, that's something I think about a lot is, and I do feel like things are shifting a bit, but things are so hierarchical, and it's like, oh yeah, people want youth involved and they want to hear young people's thoughts so they can like get what's fresh and whatnot from the youth. They don't want to put in decision making positions of leadership. I'm not saying that you gotta all of a sudden ratio where it's 50% youth and 50%, but you need to have people, depending on the organization, you need to have young people in decision-making positions and positions of leadership, and yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
Well, I was saying, like, I was thinking about even when we were talking, this is relevant to the previous question about like youth activists and people we admire. So like we talked about, and this is also related to the challenges question. Yeah,
I'm so
the top down. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Someone's got, maybe there's some noise in the background. Maybe we should all mute except Sarrah. Okay, I think we're good now. Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, I wanted to talk a little bit also, when we're talking about, Mariam was so right about like, it's very top down, not much like input taken back. And I remember like, a couple months ago at MAPS, which is like one of the local masjids, we were trying to get more people, or like the youth especially, we wanted youth programming, and we wanted, I think it was recognizing the racial inequity within the Muslim communities. And it was so hard for this, like to push this to like the administrative levels, because there was a very big barrier. So that's why one of the reasons I think, you all touched on getting the top down thing. And I wanted to highlight like a couple, like, we also have so many like local activists, and I guess one more inspiring story to kind of combat all of the kind of downhearted, is that a word? Disheartening things about, getting representation is like, we have so many local youth activists, as I said, and who are working like create change in so many different fields. And one of them I remember like was a kind of a success story, I guess you could say, is I know a couple of girls that were my age, and when the Palestinian crisis first started, like when there was a siege on Gaza a couple months ago, originally, they helped organize two protests. One was like in Kirkland and Bellevue, for Palestine, to bring awareness, and we caused quite a bit of noise. So I was really happy to see that community leaders were willing to share and let these younger people, like these high school, college aged students, take the lead in organizing it. So that just goes to show that you don't need to be passionate about every topic, or every issue, but if you have one that personally speaks to you, you don't need to organize a protest, but at least show up to the protest and show people that even as a young person, you do care, and there's a lot that we can get done, inshallah.
You know what I just thought? I mean, you guys already said this, but I think that this generation of young people has, I don't know if I want to say more power, but like a new power that is, because technology has expanded so fast. Like even me, I'm 36, like I can't keep up, and people older than me definitely sometimes have a hard time keeping up. So now we're like, oh God, we don't know what we're doing. And we know that social media is this really, really powerful tool. Like everything, anything that's going to be anything else on social media, all the movements, all the activism, it's got to take place on social media. And so I think we're realizing like, oh my God, we really need young people, and we kind of have to let them run things because we don't know what to do. Like all the local Palestinian protests recently, like from what I saw working at CAIR Washington, like it was all led by young people, like the one over in Westlake, the ones on, it was all young people organizing. So I think that's pretty cool. Like you have us over a rock with that. You have some real power there. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to cut some of the questions, but I want to talk a bit more about the YC. Are you guys okay on time? Is everyone okay?
Yeah.
All good? Okay. Najma, I want to ask you to talk a little bit more about the YAC, which is CAIR Washington's Youth Advisory Committee. I would love to know more about its inception, like how it came to be, how we thought about it, and maybe you could walk us through a little bit like what led to the creation of the YAC and what was the idea behind it.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. You all have kind of already hinted or talked about the importance of youth in leadership positions and like having youth at the center of decision-making processes. And the youth board was actually something we kind of thought on, like Sarrah mentioned earlier. It came about after these conversations we were having. Muslim Youth in Dialogue was this series that we started towards the end of last year. And it was a space to kind of talk about current issues, to discuss the things that we see happening around us, and to like brainstorm concrete actions that we can take to create change in our communities. And this was kind of started after the murder of George Floyd and the national protests that were happening, because we saw a need for having these conversations. And then during those conversations and seeing all of the work that was put out through the infographics and the education that was being done in like our community and the communities around us, we saw that there's a need for like youth voices in positions of power as an organization, like at CAIR Washington, and to have them in a leadership position. So we wanted to have more youth programming and to engage more youth in our community, but obviously we cannot do that without the voices of youth at the center of the table, right? Mm-hmm. And so the YAC is a central role at CAIR Washington to when it comes to strategic planning and providing input on a lot of the work that we do. And so by creating a youth board, we hope to build capacity as an organization for the future, right? Because ultimately the YAC was created because we believe that all sectors of the community should be represented in our organization, and that, you know, youth voices matter. So that is the creation of the YAC. And I'm super excited. Our first cohort is ending on October, and then we're gonna have a new cohort. So yeah, I'm excited to see what we do and all the cool stuff that we come up with.
And you guys have, I mean, the YAC has been pretty autonomous in a lot of ways from my perspective. Like, you guys are creating programming, you're doing events, you're like creating graphics and sending them to me like, hey, can you post this on social media? I'm like, great, wow. You're really running a lot, setting the agenda, like running your own show. And I do want to ask a question in a bit about how CAIR Washington can like support you guys more. But before that question, I want, Najma, you talked about you guys started this last summer. Last summer was the middle of the pandemic. Like, what was it like? And we've pretty much all been on Zoom doing this, you know, so far. What was it like starting the YAC during the pandemic? And what do you guys feel that your greatest successes have been so far? This is a question for all three of you, whoever wants to, maybe Najma first and then Mariam and
so I think it wasn't as hard, just because we started some youth programming with those, you know, discussions that we were having, and then transitioning into like the YAC, because we had some experience like doing stuff virtually, and because we also just didn't have a choice but to do it virtually, we kind of had to adapt. So I think in terms of challenges, I think not being able to like see each other has been hard in the beginning, but as you get used to like virtual meetings, it's easier to kind of plan around things and to like make sure that, you know, we're seeing each other, we're checking in. But yeah, and then I think in terms of great successes, I would say like all of our events so far has just been really successful. Like, we've been able to tap into different pockets of our community and engage with many new faces. Like, all the whether it was like the youth roundtable discussions we had as a part of our Muslim Days at the Capitol, where we had an opportunity to talk to like different youth in the community, to also hear their input and to hear like what they'd like to see from the YAC, or the event during Ramadan, where we were able to bring a scholar in to talk about ways that the youth can balance their religious duties and like being a student, and like also just like living in the virtual world. Like, how do we keep our sanity? And then like lastly, like, I think our career networking night is probably what I'm most proud of, because of the amount of work and dedication that the YAC has put in. And it was like really evident by just how much positive feedback we received. We were able to connect with like various different professionals of so many different careers, and it was pretty diverse. And so I think a lot of people like got benefit from that. So hearing their feedback and like also just taking notes for ourselves in order to see, okay, what can we do better? And then planning for the future. So I think everything that we've done so far, I've just been super proud of, because we've been able to accomplish our goals despite things being virtual and adapting. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy because I've never met Najma and Mariam, or even you, Jessica, in person. So hopefully one day. So that was, I think that was like the most, yeah, it wasn't a challenge, but it was interesting situation to be in. But I would say that one of the challenges that the pandemic did present to us was Zoom fatigue is very definitely real.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's much more difficult to get people to attend these things when they're virtual. Like you're sitting in front of a computer and like talking to people, but like not really. And you have the option to just like turn your camera off and mute yourself. So engagement and getting more people to come to like Zoom events is definitely much trickier. So I wish the second cohort good luck and all the best as they plan events in this transition from completely virtual to hopefully some in-person events. And I will definitely be attending those. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
For sure. I think there's definitely like a duality of it, because like for me personally, like YAC work online was like a challenge, because like completely online work, it like slows me down. Like I've noticed like in the pandemic, my productivity has just tanked a lot. Like when I was, like in person on campus, like studying and going everywhere, going to classes, going to MSA, et cetera, I was like on top of it. I was tired, of course. I was really tired, but I was on top of it. And I was like, I got this. But then like if you just contain all of your work, all of your social gatherings to just a box, and you're like, man, why should I even bother anymore? And so especially like I think for me, like YAC work was just kind of like a seesaw. Like one side of me is like, why? Like I'm so tired, like I already have school, and then I have this on top of that. And then, but the other me is like, if I don't do it, like what's the point? Like, and this is a good way to be involved. But like I'm also really tired, and the pandemic, and just
Mariam with real talk. I like it.
I know, like not everything's all fun and games, especially online. So but I definitely feel that getting attendance was like, I was like, wow, really? Like this many people came? I was like, I mean, not to be like pessimistic, but I was like, I'm sure not a lot of people are going to show up just because it's online. Like I know I've like said to people that, oh yeah, I'm going to attend the event, and then I just had my camera off and everything the whole time. So like just doing that was like a personal challenge for me. Like I needed to push myself to be involved more, and then while also not expecting that from the other person. Like if you have too high of expectations, you're just going to be disappointed, and then you're not going to be productive later. So just kind of trying to balance being productive and just taking care of yourself, I think is like a big, it's an overall challenge for really everyone has been going through this a long time.
Thank you for that, Mariam. Thanks for being real as well. I like it. Last question, and then I want to see if we can like plug a couple like ways for people to connect with us and the YAC. Big question for Mariam and Sarrah and Najma, if you want to give your thoughts too, that's great. How would you like to see CAIR-Washington grow and evolve in regards to its relationship with Muslim youth in Washington State?
I think I just have one thing that, like, even before this, we had the Youth Advisory Committee. It's related, like, the Muslim Day at the Capitol. I remember being really, really young, like 4 or 5, and back, I think CAIR had a much a bigger presence in the community. And I remember going to the Capitol with my parents, and we would go around to all of these meetings. And like, I was very confused, of course. I'm like, I don't know what I was there. But over the years, like we went for a while until they stopped them. But that exposure was really nice, and to like learn about, like, if you want change, then you got to speak up and have your voice heard and talk to people. And that exposure is so important. And I was thinking, now that I'm so happy that we brought these Muslim days at the Capitol back. And I want to see, in a post-pandemic world, I want to see youth programming, and during these days. So adults, of course, they get to talk. And I know this year, when it was virtual, you guys made an effort to also include at least like one young person to go to talk to all of our representatives. But I really would like to see more representation, and not only when we're talking to the representatives, but also like specifically youth programming. Because when it's in person, there's like lunches, and then there's speakers, and it's a whole event. So things to make it engaging for the youth, but also to show youth that, we're here, we're going to listen to you. So do not be afraid to voice your opinion.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think I kind of had a different experience than Sarrah, in that I barely knew about CAIR-Washington before I entered college. So, and naturally, like where there are more Muslims in an area, like Bellevue, Redmond area, packed with Muslims, right? Like, mashallah, it's a great thing. But then that also means that maybe CAIR event attendance, or maybe, people that are in the YIC will be disproportionately from those areas. And I think that, especially as like a statewide organization, we should, try to push more into areas that may not have as many Muslim populations, or, like, especially with youth, like reaching out to lesser known or lesser acknowledged demographics, not just in terms of politics, but just involvement. Like, you never know, like you could have never heard of CAIR-Washington your whole life, and then later you decide to work there, and then it changes your life, or or you change it for the better. So just kind of outreach to areas where you may not get outreach before, like. And there's going to be disappointment if you don't get any response, but of course it doesn't hurt to try. And you always have those areas of strong support that you always have, but you never know what you might find by looking for people and places in other areas. And that's not to say you guys aren't doing that. I'm not trying to call you guys out in any way, but like, just to,
we need to do, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. That is a goal of ours, and it's something that has been
I think, yes.
And I don't look at it as calling out. I look at it as like just being real, and like areas for improvement. Like we're always working on things, right? We're always working on like doing better and growing, and we're a small organization, we're growing. So that's how I look at it. So I really appreciate that.
Of course.
And Mariam, I just wanted to add to what Mariam was saying, like definitely, representation from other like smaller Muslim communities in different cities. And also I don't know if for CAIR as a whole, or like specifically also the Youth Advisory Committee, like partnering with other like organizations or establishments that already have a larger presence in our communities is also a great way to grow us and raise more awareness. And yeah, Mariam, what do you have to say about like how you've never heard about CAIR? A lot of people haven't heard about CAIR because like
you're not doing.
It was big. Oh wait, here, you can't see my pen. It was big, and then it fizzled out a little bit, and now we're like slowly building it back up again. So I'm excited. Hopefully it doesn't fizzle out. I think it's gonna go strong, hopefully.
And it really depends on like with Sarrah, your experience, like your family was involved, like your introduction to CAIR-Washington was your parents were involved with us. So I mean, I've been at CAIR-Washington now for over 3 years, and I go out tabling, or I have friends, I have a lot of like Somali friends, and I'll tell them about CAIR-Washington. They're like, who? And I'm like, oh my God. how do people find out about CAIR Washington? So yeah, so that just shows as well, like there's more work to be done, and we're never going to be a place where like everyone's involved and everyone knows about CAIR Washington, but it shows that like there's work to be done, and I think that that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Also, like going off of that, like this isn't necessarily related to CAIR, but I was like, wouldn't it be cool if all of like the masajid in Washington were like connected? You know, like you have MAPS, and you have Mountley Terrace, and you have like South Seattle. Like I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we were all like connected? Like it doesn't have to be like under this big organization or anything, but like, you know, just because a lot of masajid are like, we're not going to engage with this other one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? Like, although you may have different opinions, like you could still just, you know, do stuff together. And some people are very like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to engage with this masajid or this organization. I don't know why, like maybe like bad blood, maybe, I don't know. But if you don't, like, why not, you know? And that's obviously easier said than done because institutions vary in size and power and everything, but like, I don't know, could be something for the future, I guess.
Good idea.
So,
I like that idea.
Yeah, we're actually I don't want to reveal too much, but that could also be like something that a role that CAIR Washington, and we do try to serve that role, but like we want to do better, especially when we're talking about all of Washington State. So we can connect with you guys offline, but we are talking about trying to do like a mapping kind of project where we really understand like a visual map, but also just like we know where all the masjids are, where all the schools are, where all the different Muslim organizations are across our state, and then we develop connections at each of those institutions or organizations. So yeah, we should talk about it more with you guys. I think your input would be really valuable. Okay, I know we're almost at 4:15. The last thing I wanted to mention, so we're done recruiting for this cohort, right?
Yes, finished interviewing people, so yes.
I think if people want to get involved, even though we're not recruiting right now for YAC, I can't remember who mentioned it, but you can always contact us. You can call us, you can email us. If you go to CAIR-WA.org or any of our social media should have our contact info. We do try to be we try to never let anyone drop through the cracks. So if you reach out to us and you don't hear back, that's really rare, but I'm not saying it never happens. Please reach out to us again. We try to always, like 100% of the time, we try to respond to folks. And we want people involved who want to be involved. Like we want you involved. So we're going to put a link in the comments to our newsletter. I think that is probably the best way to stay up to date about the work that we're doing in CAIR Washington. The media department runs the newsletter, and we send out a newsletter once a month. And then sometimes we have additional emails about events or ways to get involved. And then the other thing, of course, is follow us on social media, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We're on all three of those. Najma, did you have anything you wanted to add to kind of these final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to add on to like what Sarrah and Mariam were saying, I think we always invite feedback, and we love to hear feedback. And if you are interested in either working with us on something or wanted to provide your input on how we could like improve, because that is our ultimate goal, is to constantly be improving for our community, you know, and making sure that we're serving the needs of everyone, please contact us. We're open to hearing everyone's thoughts and, you know, having meetings with you all, because the feedback of the community is super important, right? We want to hear what things you want, what kind of services you want from CAIR Washington, what kind of events you'd like us to put on, what you think that we need to do more on, maybe how we can like get better at like outreach to certain communities. It's just a growing process. We're always trying to learn and get better. So your input and your feedback would greatly be appreciated.
Yeah, and we're just people. Like, yes, I guess we're an institution, but it's just real. Like the people you see here, like this is part of CAIR Washington. You know, we're just regular people as well. Cool. Well, any final thoughts from anyone else before we close it out? Cool. Okay. Well, this has been
that's my all thing. I'm really glad we had this discussion. It was
yeah. This was a really, really great conversation, you guys. And I've never like talked with you face to face, and I've heard so many good things about the YAC, and even my work with you guys I've just been really impressed with the YAC. So I really would like to connect with you guys more. Maybe like we even do an in-person event. I want to get to know you guys more. So
that would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Najma, Osman, our Youth and Advocacy Coordinator, for taking time to be on this. Thank you, Mariam and Sarrah, our CAIR-Washington Youth Advisory Committee member, for taking time today. OPF, we're going to have an episode next week. I think it's TBD, so follow us on social media and watch out for that episode. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.